As someone who reads hundreds of comments on my YouTube content, and also as someone who puts out plugins and gets feedback from the market, I notice trends. I notice certain buzzwords or concepts that everyone wants to talk about, and they become really popular in the audio world. And lately, I've noticed a few of these things that have become really hot topics and must-have plugin features that I think are mostly a waste of time. And I know I'm gonna catch a lot of heat and some haters for this video, but I also think that I'm gonna help set some people free from stressing out and obsessing over things that are pretty much pointless. And the first one of these things is gain matching. Now, this comes up over and over again in comments on my videos where I'm teaching a concept or I'm doing a tutorial, I'm showing you how I use a certain plugin. And instead of really taking that in and commenting on that valuable piece of advice, I just get these comments that are like, bro, you didn't gain match. Why didn't you gain match? Why doesn't this plugin have auto gain? Aren't you supposed to set the input and output exactly the same so that you can really hear what you're doing? It kind of baffles me because I've been mixing for over 15 years before any plugins had any sort of auto gain matching feature, and I never cared, I never thought about it. And even before that, how long have people been mixing on analog gear and consoles where there certainly wasn't any type of gain matching function to match the levels for them? Now, of course, throughout the mix process, you're gonna adjust levels and outputs to roughly match the gain. If I'm compressing something, I'm naturally gonna adjust the output so that it's roughly similar to the unprocessed sound so that I can really hear what the compression is doing. This makes sense, and most people are gonna do this organically when needed without really having to think too much about it. But when it comes to other tools like EQ and even saturation, why do you need to level match? I mean, this actually makes no sense to me, and I'm gonna show you why. So to demonstrate what I'm talking about here, I'm gonna solo the guitars in this mix, and I'm gonna pull up this Pulsar 8200 EQ. Now, I just started playing with this plugin recently, and I like it. This is a really cool EQ plugin. But it has this auto gain button, which is gonna help me demonstrate this. So let's say I wanna add some more upper mid content, some more bite and grind to this guitar sound. Okay, pretty normal EQ happening there. We can really hear the difference. But if I hit this auto gain button on, watch how different this sounds. It's like I'm pushing it up just as much, but the difference I'm hearing is way smaller. It's actually harder to hear what I'm doing. Now again, if I switch this off, pretty big difference. So in essence, if you've got auto gain on and you're making EQ moves, you're adding more of a certain frequency range, but then that algorithm is going back and it's correcting for that, and it's bringing the signal down overall so that it sounds like the same loudness. So you're basically fighting against and undoing the very move that you're trying to make. Because if I have auto gain on here, to achieve that same effect, I've got to boost that EQ, and now I've also got to turn up the volume of the guitar track to hear that difference. And so I've now just added a completely unnecessary extra step. And I think of saturation in a similar way. Like with saturation, you're adding frequency content. You're trying to make the sound bigger, make it take up more space in the mix. So let's do the same thing. For example, escalator. Okay, we're adding frequency content, we're pumping it up, and that's a difference that you can really easily hear when you A/B it. But if we try to gain match that, okay, now the difference becomes more subtle, but again, it's harder to make that call in the mix. Listen. You're pretty hard pressed to hear the difference there, but again, what's the point of that? I mean, to me, if I'm using saturation, I want it to have more energy. So why would I want to pull up a plugin, add more energy to it, and then take away the energy that I just added so that it's the same as before? Like, to me, it's basically defeating my original purpose. Now, sometimes I'm cranking up a lot of saturation and I do need to pull down the output because it's clipping or it's going too hot into the rest of the plugin chain. But when you're adding saturation, harmonics, distortion, it's supposed to make it sound louder. That's the point. You're adding more content to the signal. That's why you're using it, and that's how you hear what difference it's making. Don't miss my point here. I'm not saying that you shouldn't try and keep your output levels roughly the same as your inputs while you're mixing. But if that's what you're focusing on and you're spending more than a second or two adjusting that level, or if you're second guessing your decisions and you're stressing out about not having an auto gain match function, your mind is in the wrong place. You are no longer focusing on whether you're making the song better or not. And in some cases, like with EQ, it's actually counterproductive. It's making it harder for you to hear what you're doing and make the right decision. And remember, the purpose of making a mix move is to alter the sound in a way that you feel is necessary for the track. The goal is not to alter a sound, process it, and then go back and try and match it as close as possible to the original sound. All right, second thing people need to relax about is oversampling. I don't care about oversampling. The pro mixers who I respect, they're not out there talking about oversampling either. So what even is oversampling? Well, basically it's just when a plugin is operating at a higher sample rate internally, so that if it's generating extra frequency content like harmonics, saturation, it can do that without introducing as much additional unwanted distortion back into the signal, which is called aliasing. Now, if you want to go deeper and learn more about that whole thing, you can just use Google, but that's the gist of it. So technically on an EQ or on a compressor, oversampling is completely pointless because you're not adding any extra harmonic content. It's only tools like saturation and distortion where this actually comes into play. So there have been a couple times where I'm using an amp sim plugin and I hit that oversampling button on, and I feel like I hear a bit of a difference, like it's a little bit cleaner or something. But I'm talking about a 1 or 2% difference here. And to be honest, I question whether I'm actually hearing any difference at all and whether it's not just a total placebo effect. And I'm not ashamed to admit that. You know, I've managed to build a career and make records that millions of people listen to without ever worrying about oversampling. Now, maybe if you're working on stuff that's really pure and really sparse, and you really need it to be as clean as possible, and you really care about not having any additional noise, you might have a reason to think about this. But then again, if that's what you're working on, you're probably not gonna be cranking up saturation and distortion anyways. And I find it ironic that people obsess over analog gear because of the extra noise and warmth and saturation and subtle distortion that it adds, and they want that. But then those same people turn around and they roast plugins for not being completely clean. With my plugin company, we sometimes get asked by customers, hey, can you add oversampling into the plugin? And the question I wanna ask back is, why? What problem are you hearing? Are you hearing something wrong with the sound that oversampling is gonna fix? And of course, the answer is probably no. It's just that oversampling has become this symbol of quality or status, but most of the time it's completely unnecessary or irrelevant, and it really can be purely a marketing gimmick that you're just playing into. The actual difference is inconsequential, because oversampling, or lack thereof, is not the reason that your mix doesn't sound good enough. You know, tons of hit records that sound great were made way before oversampling was a thing, and they're still being made today by people like me who could care less. So this is something you can safely forget about. All right, number 3, man, do I hate this tool, Plugin Doctor. I mean, I had no idea that this thing even existed until we started putting out plugins. And I remember someone was reviewing one of our plugins once in a YouTube video, and you know, they're playing with the plugin and they're saying they like it. Oh, this sounds pretty good. They're turning knobs. They like what it's doing. Then they pull up Plugin Doctor and run it through Plugin Doctor, and then suddenly they decide that they actually don't like the plugin with their eyes. This is like eating a cookie and thinking it tastes delicious, and then analyzing the chemical breakdown of the cookie and then deciding that no, it actually is not delicious. It actually tastes horrible. I'll say this pretty directly. There is absolutely zero place for a tool like Plugin Doctor in the workflow of someone trying to mix music. Now, if you are worried what a plugin looks like in Plugin Doctor, and if you're letting that dictate your decisions to any degree, you are way off track. Like, are you gonna buy a guitar pedal and then hook it up to an oscilloscope and then use that to decide whether the pedal sounds cool or not? Like, guys, this stuff is just so ridiculous. And the fact that people are using tools like this to try and gain credibility and judge a sound, like, I honestly cannot think of anything less useful. For goodness sake, this is music. Use your ears, listen to it. You cannot see whether something sounds good. Okay, that's the end of my rant. There are just so many little tiny things in the audio world that make 1 or 2% difference at most, but they become these huge obsessions and obstacles for people. But if you're someone who's just wanting to make your mixes sound more professional, more competitive, just get better at the craft, then every second you spend focusing on these things that have nothing to do with actually listening, you're just wasting your time. So with that in mind, I better not make this video 1 second longer than it needs to be. Go and watch this instead for some stuff that will actually make you better.